The Silent Companion. Chapter 1. The Finding. The sun hung low over the scrubland like a dying ember, casting long shadows across the desert floor when Jeremiah Jeb McAllister first saw her. He'd been riding the perimeter of his small ranch, checking fence lines and water holes, when his horse suddenly shied and whinnied, ears pricked forward toward a cluster of mesquite bushes. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, a deer or maybe a stray calf. But as he dismounted and approached cautiously, Winchester rifle ready in his weathered hands, he saw the pale flash of human skin through the thorny branches. She was curled up like a frightened animal, naked except for a torn piece of burlap that barely covered her. Her dark hair was matted with dirt and blood, and angry welts crisscrossed her back like a roadmap of pain. But it was the marking on her neck that made Jeb's blood run cold. The crude raised letters burned into her flesh. No voice. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, maybe 17 years old. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted from Jeb to his rifle and back again. She pressed herself deeper into the thorns, seemingly unaware that they were tearing at her already damaged skin. Jeb set his rifle down slowly and raised his empty hands. "Easy there, little one," he said in the same gentle tone he used with spooked horses. "I ain't gonna hurt you." The girl's mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound emerged, only a rasping whisper of air. She touched her throat with trembling fingers, and Jeb understood. The brand wasn't just marking, it was a promise kept. Someone had made sure she truly had no voice. For a long moment, they regarded each other in silence. Jeb had always been a man of few words himself, more comfortable with the quiet companionship of his horses and cattle than with the chatter of townspeople. Perhaps that's why he didn't feel the need to fill the silence with empty reassurances or questions she couldn't answer. Instead, he slowly removed his leather jacket and held it out to her. When she didn't move, he set it on the ground between them and backed away. Then he sat down cross-legged in the dirt, positioning himself so he could see her, but wasn't blocking her escape route. "I reckon we can just sit here a spell," he said quietly, tipping his hat down over his eyes. "No rush." Chapter 2. The Waiting. The desert twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold as Jeb maintained his patient vigil. He'd learned long ago that some wounds couldn't be rushed, whether they were on a green-broke horse or a damaged human being. The girl remained hidden in the mesquite, but he could sense her watching him, measuring him. As full darkness fell, Jeb heard the soft rustle of movement. He didn't look up, but from the corner of his eye he saw a pale hand dart out to snatch the jacket. More rustling followed as she struggled into it, the leather garment dwarfing her small frame. "There's a waterhole about 50 yards that way," Jeb said, nodding toward the east without looking at her directly. "Clean and sweet. Animals come to drink at dawn and dusk, so it's safe." He paused, then added, "I'll be heading home soon. My place is about a mile northeast. Cabin's got a good roof and a warm fire." He stood slowly, collected his rifle and walked back to his horse. As he mounted up, he looked back once. She had emerged partially from the mesquite and was standing in the open, clutching the jacket around herself. Even in the moonlight, he could see the angry brand on her neck. "I'll be back this way come morning," he said, to check the water hole. Then he rode away, leaving her alone with her choice. Chapter 3. The Return. True to his word, Jeb returned at dawn. The girl was gone from the mesquite thicket, but he found signs of her passage near the waterhole, small footprints in the mud, and evidence that someone had drunk deeply and clumsily, like someone who hadn't had clean water in days. He followed her trail easily enough. She'd made no effort to hide her passage, perhaps because she didn't know how, or perhaps because some part of her wanted to be found. The tracks led in a meandering circle that eventually pointed toward his cabin. Jeb found her collapsed about a quarter-mile from his homestead, exhaustion finally claiming her. She was still alive, but burning with fever. Carefully, gently, he lifted her onto his horse and took her home. His cabin was simple but sturdy. 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, a good well, and a root cellar that stayed cool even in summer. He laid her on his own bed and covered her with quilts his mother had made years before she died. Then he set about the business of nursing her back to health. For 3 days the fever raged. Jeb spooned broth between her cracked lips, bathed her burning skin with cool water, and changed the bandages he'd fashioned for her wounds. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes thrashing wildly, sometimes lying still as death. During her lucid moments, her eyes would find his face, wide with fear and confusion. He never left her side for more than a few minutes at a time. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice was soft and steady. "You're safe now," he would murmur as he tended to her. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here." On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Jeb woke from his doze in the chair beside the bed to find her eyes open and clear, watching him with something that might have been curiosity rather than terror. "Morning," he said simply. She tried to speak, touching her throat when no sound emerged. Frustration flickered across her features, followed quickly by shame. "Don't trouble yourself about it," Jeb said. "I ain't much for talking anyway. Always figured a man or woman ought to be judged by what they do, not what they say." Chapter 4. Learning to Stay. Recovery was slow. The girl's body healed faster than her spirit, the wounds on her back and arms closing into pink scars while the deeper damage remained hidden. She was skittish as a wild mustang, jumping at sudden noises and flinching away from any quick movement. Jeb gave her space, going about his daily routines as if nothing had changed. He fed his horses, mended fences, and tended his small garden. Sometimes he would catch her watching him through the window, but when he looked directly at her she would dart away like a spooked deer. On the 7th day, he woke to find her gone. His heart sank, but he forced himself to go about his morning chores. She was free to leave whenever she chose, he'd made that clear, but when he returned to the cabin for lunch, he found her in the kitchen, struggling to work the hand pump at the sink. She froze when she saw him, ready to bolt. But Jeb just nodded and showed her how to prime the pump properly. When the water flowed clear and cold, something like wonder crossed her face. She cupped her hands and drank deeply, then splashed water on her face and neck, careful not to wet the bandage covering her brand. "I could use some help around here," Jeb said as if the thought had just occurred to him. "Never was much good at cooking or keeping house. If you've a mind to stay a while, I'd be grateful for the assistance." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for some hidden meaning or threat. Finding none, she nodded once, quickly. That night, she made a bed for herself on the floor in the main room, despite Jeb's offer to rig up a partition for privacy. He understood she needed to know she could see all the entrances and exits. Trust would come in its own time, if it came at all. Chapter 5. The Language of Silence. Summer settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. Jeb and the girl, he'd taken to calling her Grace in his mind, though he'd never spoken the name aloud, developed an easy routine. She proved remarkably capable once her strength returned, able to cook simple meals, tend the garden, and even help with some of the lighter ranch work. They communicated through gestures, expressions, and the kind of comfortable silence that exists between people who understand each other. Grace proved clever at finding ways to make herself understood. She would point to things she needed, act out simple requests, or draw pictures in the dirt when words failed her. Jeb found himself talking more than he had in years, not because he expected answers, but because the silence between them felt natural rather than awkward. He would explain what he was doing as he worked, describe the weather, or tell stories about his horses and cattle. Grace listened with an intensity that suggested she was storing away every word. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Grace touched Jeb's arm and pointed to herself, then to him, then spread her hands in a questioning gesture. "You want to know about me?" Jeb interpreted. When she nodded, he leaned back in his chair and considered where to start. "Ain't much to tell," he said finally. "My pa bought this land when I was a boy, worked it with him until he died. Then my ma passed a few years later. Been on my own since then. Never had much use for town life or complications." Grace tilted her head and Jeb found himself continuing. "Had me a wife once, long time ago, Sarah Jane. Pretty as a picture and sweet as honey, but she didn't take to the loneliness out here. One day I came back from a cattle drive and found a note saying she'd gone back east to her family. Can't say as I blamed her." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Reckon some people are meant for solitude and others ain't. I learned which kind I was." Grace reached out tentatively and touched his hand where it rested on the arm of his chair. Her touch was light as a butterfly's wing, but it conveyed more comfort than any words could have. Chapter 6. The Storm Clouds. Their peaceful existence was shattered on a scorching August afternoon when 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Jeb spotted them first, and immediately felt his blood turn to ice. Something about the way they rode, purposeful and predatory, set every instinct screaming. Grace was hanging laundry on the line behind the cabin when Jeb found her. The moment she saw his face, she went pale. Without a word, he grabbed her hand and led her to the root cellar. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. "Don't come out no matter what you hear. You understand me?" Grace grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with terror. She shook her head frantically and tried to pull him toward the cellar with her. "I can't," Jeb said gently but firmly. "If they're who I think they are, running won't solve nothing. They'll just keep coming." He cupped her face in his hands, looking directly into her eyes. "I won't let them take you. I swear it." Grace's mouth opened in what would have been a sob if she could make sound. Said. Tears spilled down her cheeks as Jeb kissed her forehead and pushed her gently into the cellar, closing the door behind her. The 3 men rode into the yard like they owned it. The leader was a big man with cruel eyes and a face marked by old violence. His companions were cut from the same cloth, the kind of men who made their living from other people's misery. "Afternoon," the leader called out, not bothering to dismount. "Name's Cole Bannister. I'm looking for something that belongs to me." "Can't say as I know you," Jeb replied, standing easy but ready, his hand never far from his gun. "And I can't imagine what I'd have that belongs to you." Bannister smiled, but there was no warmth in it.
Little bird flew the coop about 6 weeks back. Dark hair about this high. He held his hand at shoulder level. Might be hard to miss on account of the marking on her neck. Don't recall seeing anyone like that, Jeb said steadily. Now, that's funny, Bannister said, climbing down from his horse, because we tracked her right to your door. He nodded to his men, who spread out to flank Jeb. See, she's valuable property. Took me considerable time and effort to train her proper. Can't have her wandering off whenever she takes a notion. I said I ain't seen her, Jeb repeated, his voice deadly quiet. Bannister laughed. You know what I think? I think you're lying. And I think you got my property hidden somewhere around here. His hand moved to his gun butt. Now, we can do this easy or we can do it hard, but either way, I'm leaving here with what's mine. She ain't property, Jeb said. She's a human being. Not anymore, she ain't. Bannister sneered. I made sure of that. Cut out her voice myself when she wouldn't stop screaming. Branded her so everyone would know what she was. She's a broken thing now, good for only one purpose. The rage that filled Jeb was cold and pure, like winter wind across the desert. Mister, he said quietly, I think you'd better get back on your horse and ride out, while you still can. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The gunfight was brief but vicious. Bannister drew first, but Jeb was faster, the result of countless hours practicing his draw, and a righteous anger that made his movements sure and clean. Bannister's shot went wide, Jeb's didn't. The other two men hesitated just long enough for Jeb to roll behind the water trough and come up shooting. One went down immediately. The other managed to wound Jeb in the shoulder before a bullet from Jeb's gun ended his threat permanently. When the smoke cleared, all three attackers lay dead in the yard. Jeb sat heavily on the porch steps, pressing his hand to his bleeding shoulder, and called for Grace. She emerged from the root cellar like a ghost, her face white with terror. When she saw the bodies, she stopped dead, then looked at Jeb's wound and rushed to his side. I'm all right, he assured her, though his voice was strained with pain. Just a graze. They're gone, Grace. They can't hurt you anymore. With gentle hands, she helped him into the cabin and set about cleaning his wound. Her touch was sure and competent. She'd clearly tended injuries before. As she worked, tears ran silently down her cheeks, though whether from relief, gratitude, or grief, Jeb couldn't say. That evening, after they'd buried the three men in unmarked graves far from the cabin, Grace made her way to Jeb's room where he lay recovering. She carried a piece of paper and a pencil, supplies Jeb kept for inventory and accounts. Sitting beside his bed, she wrote carefully, her letters uneven but legible. Why did you save me? Jeb studied the question for a long moment. Same reason you'd pull a wounded animal out of a trap, I reckon, because it's the right thing to do. Grace wrote again, I can never repay you. Don't want repayment, Jeb said simply. Just want you to be safe and free. Her next words took longer to write. I was 12 when they took me. I don't remember much from before. Don't know who I really am. Don't matter who you were, Jeb replied. What matters is who you choose to be now. Grace looked at him for a long time, then wrote one more line. I choose to stay with you, if you'll have me. I'd be honored, Jeb said solemnly. Chapter 8. The Healing. Autumn brought changes to the ranch. Grace's strength continued to return, not just physical, but something deeper, a growing confidence and sense of self. She learned to read by studying Jeb's small collection of books, and though she could never speak, she became eloquent with pen and paper. Jeb's shoulder healed clean, though it ached on cold mornings. More importantly, something in his own spirit had begun to mend as well. Having Grace to care for, to protect, gave his life a purpose it had lacked since his wife left. They made an odd pair, the taciturn rancher and the silent girl, but they understood each other in ways that didn't require words. Grace proved to have a gentle way with animals, and a keen mind for the practical aspects of ranch work. Under her care, the cabin became a true home, with flowers in the windows, and the smell of fresh bread filling the rooms. One evening in late October, as they sat by the fire, Grace handed Jeb a letter she'd been working on for days. It was longer than any she'd written before, her handwriting careful and precise. Dear Jeb, it began, I wanted to tell you about the dreams I've been having. They're not nightmares anymore, they're memories. I remember a little house with blue shutters, and a woman who sang while she cooked. I think she was my mother. I remember a man who taught me to read using old newspapers, and a garden where I grew sunflowers taller than my head. I know I can never get that life back, and I know I'll never be the same person I was before. But I'm starting to understand that maybe that's not such a terrible thing. The girl I was before was weak and helpless. The woman I'm becoming is stronger. You asked me once who I choose to be. I choose to be someone worthy of the kindness you've shown me. I choose to be someone who can stand beside you, not just behind you. I choose to be Grace, not because it's the name you gave me in your mind, but because it's what you've shown me. Grace in the face of cruelty, grace in silence, grace in simple human kindness. I can't give you back your voice the way you gave me back my life, but I can give you my loyalty, my trust, and my love, if you'll accept them.
Jeb read the letter twice, his weathered hands gentle with the paper. When he looked up, Grace was watching him with an expression of nervous hope. "Grace," he said softly, and the name felt right on his tongue. "I reckon we've both been broken in different ways. Maybe that's what makes us fit together so well. We understand each other's scars." He reached out and took her hand. The first time he'd touched her since that day, he'd helped her from the root cellar. "I'd be proud to call you my partner," he said, in every sense of the word. Grace smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd ever seen from her, and squeezed his hand in response. Epilogue: the years after. 5 years later, travelers passing through the high desert would sometimes stop at the McAllister Ranch for water and directions. They would find a prosperous homestead with well-tended fields and fat cattle, maintained by an unusual couple, a quiet rancher and his silent wife. Those travelers often remarked on the strange dynamic between the two. They communicated through looks and gestures, finishing each other's thoughts without speaking. The woman was beautiful in a fierce way, with intelligent eyes and silver scars on her neck that she wore without shame. The man was gruff but kind, clearly devoted to his wife and protective in a way that suggested he'd fight the devil himself for her. Some visitors, noting the woman's silence, would ask if she was mute from birth. Jeb would simply reply that she chose not to speak, and something in his tone discouraged further questions. What the travelers couldn't see was the collection of notebooks Grace kept, filled with her thoughts, observations, and the stories she remembered or imagined. They couldn't know about the evenings when Jeb would read aloud while Grace mended clothes or worked on her own writing. They couldn't understand the perfect peace that existed in the silence between two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Grace never did regain her voice, and in time she stopped mourning its loss. She had found other ways to speak, through her actions, her written words, and the love that grew stronger each day between herself and the man who had saved her not just from death, but from despair. Sometimes, in the evening quiet of the desert when the wind was just right and the stars seemed close enough to touch, Grace would press her hand to her throat and remember the pain, but the memory no longer had power over her. She had learned that silence could be its own kind of voice, and that some things, love, loyalty, the bond between two wounded souls, needed no words at all. Jeb had been right that first day when he'd said they could just sit together for a while. Sometimes that's all any of us need, someone willing to sit silently by our side until we're strong enough to stand again. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, that person stays beside us long enough for silence to become its own language, and for two damaged hearts to heal as one. In the end, Grace and Jeb McAllister lived quietly but fully, partners in every sense of the word, proving that the most profound communications often happen without a single word being spoken. Their love story was written not in grand gestures or passionate declarations, but in the daily choice to remain by each other's side, understanding that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply our presence and our unwavering faith that they are worthy of love regardless of their scars.